Hello and welcome to Everything's All Right, a bi-monthly podcast for authors and writers with tips, tricks, and challenges to level up your writing skills. I am aslewis, your host, guide, and guru for all things word-related. I'm a published science fiction and fantasy author, a published nonfiction author, and a fan fiction enthusiast, which means I'm also a really big nerd. For the past several years, I've been writing everything from multi-million-dollar grant proposals to sci-fi novels to ghostwriting for national leaders and politicians to spoken word poetry and anything and, well, everything in between. And I'm here to help you improve your writing, no matter what type of writing that is. And who doesn't want to get better? So let's get right to it. Hello again. I am your host, A.S. Lewis, and welcome to episode 3 of Everything's All Right, a podcast for writers looking to practice, sharpen, and expand their skills. Today's topic of discussion is story closings. In the previous episode, we explored the importance of crafting a stellar opening for your story. A great opening line is essential, as it is your first impression you give to the reader about how great a writer or storyteller you are. However, how you end your story is just as important as how you begin it, because it is the last impression your reader gets of your writing and your storytelling. Think of your story like a magnificent dish set before you. The first taste of food must be delicious, but if the last bite sours on your tongue, your entire memory of the meal may be called into question. So then, it is vital that your dish, your story, be tasty from first bite to last. But here is the hard part. How exactly does one do that? How do you make sure that your last line is as memorable and fulfilling as your first line? As always, let's take a look at a few authors who have mastered this writer's recipe. Ending a great novel or story can be surprisingly difficult. As a writer, you want to end with the same hook and bang intensity your story started with, but that doesn't mean that everything is tied up in a tidy little bow. Some of the best end story payoffs are often a tad unpredictable. Good last lines have the ability to stop a reader cold and completely reorient what they thought they knew about your story or about your characters. These closing lines can be haunting, lyrical, humorous, or depressingly maudlin. But what they all do is give the reader some sense of closure, even if, like in a series, there is more to come. A really good last line sticks with us forever. Many writers do it well, but a talented few do it perfectly. Take the last line from Cormac McCarthy's The Road. In the deep glens where they lived, all things were older than man, and they hummed of mystery. Personally, I just read this book last weekend, and I wish I had read it sooner. The last line is both haunting and lyrical, and it reminds the reader that life continues regardless of the apocalyptic shenanigans of men. The earth was here before us and will keep on spinning long after we're gone. It's a beautiful yet somewhat bleak perspective shift that closes out this intimate story wonderfully. Another pensive ending line comes from an author who made the short list for best opening lines, George Orwell. In his book, Animal Farm, he ends with the following. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again, but already it was impossible to say which was which. This closing commentary is Clemens-worthy in my opinion. With the book's last sentence, Orwell invites critique into what qualifies as a man, and it reiterates the theme of the entire piece. The human animal is indeed an animal. So how does it really differ from any other animal, especially when that animal walks and talks and destroys just like a man? Funny story about this book that has nothing to do with the topic at hand, but I thought I might share it. Some 12 years ago, I adopted a rescue kitten. The baby had just been weaned, and her mother had either abandoned her or was unable to return to her. So I took her in. Not only had I never had a cat before, most of my life I was strictly a dog person, but this poor thing was a feral cat. So I did what anyone in my generation would do. I Googled how to socialize a feral kitten. Wise and all-knowing, Google instructed me to keep her in a small space with a safe place for her to hide. And when I wasn't there, to keep her company, I was to play talk radio, so she would grow accustomed to the sound of human voices. Well, I didn't have a talk radio, and in that instance, the internet suggested that I read to her. Easy enough. I took the book I was currently reading and spent a few hours a day reading out loud to her. It only occurred to me afterwards that I was reading a book about an animal insurrection to a feral cat. Needless to say, I think the book gave her some ideas that I'm still paying for today. Or maybe she's just a cat and she's not actually planning my violent overthrow. Who knows? Anywho, Orwell is a master at both novel openings and closings. If you want to emulate an author, you could do far worse than Old George. Another timeless off-reference last line comes from Gothic author Mary Shelley. In her masterpiece, Frankenstein, or alternatively, the modern Prometheus, she ends saying the following: "He was soon borne away by the waves and lost in darkness and distance." The he in this sentence refers, of course, to the monster created by Dr. Frankenstein, who at this point is already dead. The monster, knowing he has no life among human men, consigns himself to death. In this line, we see the monster return to the distant dark of death from which he was created. It is a fitting and rather poetic closing of a circle and a great ending line. Those are just a few examples of authors who know how to nail that last line. But how can you do it? Well, here's a few tips and tricks to help you write a memorable last line of your own. Here are my 4 tips to creating a great closing line for your story. Utilize your title or your opening line. I love symmetry. When I write a story where I am able to use my title or my first line as my last line, it just makes me feel, I don't know. If there are any magician fans out there, well, it makes me feel like I've eaten one of those happy cupcakes. Suffice to say, it feels quite good. It is closure of a different sort, and it is a definite signal to the reader that this particular story is at its end. Search your last chapter. Sometimes you may discover that you've already written your last line, but it's in the wrong place. A great strategy is to reread your final chapter, section, page, or paragraph. Often, the perfect ending line has already been crafted by you. It just needs a change in location. Utilize major themes or symbols. You've written a story for a reason. There is something you want to say, show, or explore. This something is generally your theme, and there is no better linchpin for that theme than tying it to your last lines. Search your work for thematic motifs and symbology you can reintroduce at the close of your writing. You don't want to simplify it or end with that rather elementary moral of the story kind of reference. After all, you didn't write a PSA. But if you can find a way to reinforce your theme without actually stating it, well, you are well on your way to crafting a spectacular close. start with the end. There are some authors, and I admit I am not one of them, who begins their work by writing the last line first. While I can see the advantages of doing so, it's really not how I operate. That said, is this something you already do? If so, I'd love to hear from you and how you go about it. Drop me a line, share your experience, and I'll share it on the show during a future episode. Now, let's put our pens where our words are and put what we've learned into practice. Here is your bi-weekly Wordsmith challenge. Here it is, your bi-weekly Wordsmith challenge. In no more than 2 sentences, write a closing line designed to satisfy, surprise, or provoke your reader into thought. Once you've written your closing, you can email it to aslewisbooks@gmail.com. The best opening lines will be highlighted in a future episode and on the website. And if you don't want to share your work, that's okay too. The important thing is that you're writing and trying something new. That's how writing gets better. Even if you hate what you wrote, I promise you the practice will pay off. If you've enjoyed the show and would like to hear more, please click subscribe so you never miss an episode. Keep writing, and remember, everything's all right.